The Bhagavad Gita is somewhat unique in world religions in that if you think about the sacred texts of different religions, for example, Buddhism, the Sutta Pitaka, the Sutta basket where different teachings or revelations, you could say, are attributed to the person Buddha, who is certainly not considered in mainstream Buddhism to be God. He's simply an enlightened, well, I don't even know if you can say an enlightened soul. He's an enlightened something. I guess he's a Buddha. And then later you get in Mahayana Buddhism the idea of a bodhisattva, a Buddha-like person who comes back to this world. And so all those teachings are coming from persons who are like you and me, but perhaps better off, perhaps wiser. But still, certainly not God. And if you look at Judaism, there are many statements attributed to God in Judaism. Especially if you look at the Old Testament, there are different stages, different kinds of texts. In the beginning, there's, so to speak, a state of nature where God personally speaks to people. God speaks to Adam or to Eve or to other persons, to Abraham or to Abraham's wife or to Isaiah or Rebecca. There's one story in the early part of the Bible where Rebecca, I think, is having trouble with her pregnancy, and so she complains to God, or sort of laments to God, just as a daughter might complain or lament to a father. And so there's this situation where God is personally speaking with people all the time. And there are certainly teachings involved, but nothing that you could call systematic philosophy. And then later, of course, God becomes more remote, and the teachings come through prophets. So you have the whole prophetic tradition. Then, of course, you have the appearance of Jesus and teachings attributed to Jesus. But again, Jesus, at least in his own words, not God the Father, but speaking as a representative of God. And then you have, of course, we skip Jainism with Mahavir, and Islam, where you have the notion of God speaking to the angel Gabriel, who speaks to the prophet Muhammad, who then speaks to us. So we have teachings attributed to God, but coming through various layers or through various links in a chain. So the Bhagavad Gita is unique in the sense that it is a serious philosophical work attributed directly to God, in which you have the claim made, which is somewhat unique, actually, in world religions. You have the claim made of God personally coming to the world and speaking and personally teaching. So the claim itself is somewhat unique. There's really nothing exactly like the Bhagavad Gita, where you have of course, you could find all kinds of texts which are attributed to different divine powers, but in terms of a sacred text which is central to a major world religion, there is something unique about the Bhagavad Gita. The explicit claims that are made there. So we're going to cover chapter 10. At the beginning of chapter 10 of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna makes several statements which, in a sense, appropriate or identify with the Vedanta tradition. You may remember in the Brahma Sutras, the very first statement was that the absolute truth is that which is the source of everything. That the source of everything is the absolute truth. That was the very first statement of the Brahma Sutras, and there are similar statements in the Upanishads, Jito, Vayavani, Bhutani, Jayante, that from which all these creatures are born, and so on. So Krishna claims to be the absolute truth of Vedanta, the absolute truth of the Brahma Sutras, and the source of everything. And this comes out very explicitly in chapter 10. Beginning of chapter 10, statements like, in the second verse of chapter 10, Name viduk suragana prabhavang namaharshaya. Krishna says, neither the gods nor the great sages know my origin. In this Vedic culture, of course, the top of the metaphysical pyramid is the gods and, of course, the great sages. The great sages who see the truth, who speak the Vedas, and the gods who rule the universe. In other words, the supreme Brahmins, you could say, and the supreme Kshatriyas, the supreme rulers, the gods and the great sages, who teach all this knowledge, and yet Krishna says that both the gods, or neither the gods nor the great sages know my origin. And the reason is, Ahamadiri Devanang Maharshinang Sasarasa, because in all respects, I am the origin of the gods and the sages. So this is it's a simple logic. You cannot, how should I put it? You can't, in your present form, have direct knowledge of the birth of your parents, because it's just the way it is. Your parents are born before you are, at least you in this incarnation. And so therefore, no one can really say that in this incarnation, in this body, I personally witnessed the birth of my parents, because they're the source of your birth. So Krishna is giving an argument roughly analogous to this. He's saying, I am the origin of the gods and the sages, therefore they don't know my origin. So Krishna introduces this theme of origins in that way. And then he says that Jo Mam Ajamanadincha Viti Loka Maheshwara, one who knows me as beginningless, as having no origin, as having no beginning. One who knows me as beginningless and as literally the great Lord of the worlds, such a person unbewildered among mortals is freed from all sins. This is a theme which runs throughout the Bhagavad Gita, the power of knowledge. The power of knowledge. That if you know something, the truth will set you free. Which, of course, is a theme also in many different Western traditions. There's a tradition called Gnosticism, from the word gnosis, Sanskrit jnana, which simply means knowledge. And Shankara, in his commentary in the Bhagavad Gita, stressed this, the power of knowledge. In other chapters of the Gita, Krishna taught real knowledge. And here, it's not merely a doctrine. There are religious traditions where if you believe a particular doctrine, then you'll be saved. If you have faith in a particular doctrine. What Krishna's talking about here is not believing the right doctrine, whatever that may be, but actually coming to a certain stage of consciousness. And in that sense, it's reminiscent of Buddhism, that the emphasis is on having a real experience, actually understanding something, not merely believing something, and certainly not merely performing a ritual, but actually coming to a deep understanding of reality. And it is that understanding which sets you free. I mean, you think about this, this is also very similar to modern psychology. Let's say someone has a phobia, which basically is an irrational fear, like someone's afraid, let's say, of, I don't know, dark places or heights or whatever. An irrational fear in the sense that there is no apparent danger. A phobia is a situation where even in the absence of some apparent danger, and even where it's not really reasonable to suppose that you are in danger, there's nothing really threatening you, still one emotionally is frightened, perhaps even deeply frightened. And so, or let's say irrational attachments. Let's say someone becomes attached to another person, even though that person can really do that person no good. In other words, I'm attached to someone who actually is kind of making my life miserable. And there's no reasonable hope that this person is going to, in some way, improve my life. In fact, it's very likely this person will make my life worse than it is now. So, and yet there's an attachment. So, in cases where, because of an irrational attachment or a phobia, or perhaps an irrational conviction, like I think that people are out to get me when they're really not, all these different things, in a sense, a typical therapy will involve, and there are hundreds of different modalities of psychological therapy, but the basic idea is to bring you to a point of a better understanding. Like if you could really understand the situation, you would not have this fear, you would not have this attachment, you would not have this anger or whatever. It's a question of understanding reality. So In that sense, the Gita is highly psychological because the emphasis is on coming to a state of consciousness. Not merely believing a particular doctrine or dogma or performing a particular ritual, but just getting it, just coming to knowledge, being enlightened. And so again, in that sense, it's sort of the same kind of emphasis the Buddha gave, that privileging experience over mere faith and doctrine and so on. At the same time, there's nothing like a good map. Who is it, men or women, that don't like maps? Wait, men don't like to ask directions and women don't like maps. Anyway, so the idea is that a book of knowledge is a type of roadmap. Now, if I get, let's say I'm trying to get to some, I don't know, very desirable place like Micanopy. And it's actually a quaint little place, a lot of loud barking dogs, but anyway, so let's say you're trying to get to Micanopy, and you've got a map. I mean, the map isn't Micanopy. On the map, there's a dot that says Micanopy. Or maybe you even have a map of Micanopy. And so, you can see all the different streets. The map is not the town, but it's nice. It's good to have a map. So in that sense, the book itself is a type of roadmap. And, well, that's one aspect of it. It's a roadmap. It can also be more than a roadmap. I'm going to sort of bring in some paradox here, but let's say accepting an obvious distinction between a philosophy, a doctrine, a belief in something, and the actual experience. You see it. You actually know it in the deep sense of the term. There's a sense in which these sacred texts, like Bhagavad Gita, are held to be more than mere descriptions or assertions. There's a sense in which it's the thing itself. The word is the thing itself. I mean, if you think of the first sentence of the book of John, the New Testament, in the beginning was the Logos, which is translated in the beginning was the Word. There's a type of speech in philosophy which is called performative speech, or a performative speech act. And to give an example of this, let's say in a baseball game. You all know baseball, right? This is America. So in a baseball game, if the umpire says you're out, you're out. I mean, and now imagine let's say the sportscaster, the person up in the box that's, describing the game on the radio or television says, and so the guy up in or the lady who's doing the broadcast says, he's out. Now, when the broadcaster says he's out, that's just a descriptive statement. When the umpire says you're out, it's actually, that statement creates the reality. So it's not merely a description. If an umpire says you are out, the umpire is not merely describing something, the umpire is creating that fact by saying it. Or, for example, let's say an authorized person says, I now pronounce you man and wife, as they do. They still say that, don't they? Anyway, so if the authorized person says, I now pronounce you man and wife, the authorized person saying that makes it a fact. It becomes a fact because the person said it. Because the person said it. The saying of it creates the reality. And so there is a notion in this culture, in this getting back now to Vedic Hindu culture. That's not what I wanted to write. There is a key term which is Shabda Brahma. Shabda means sound or word, and Brahma means the absolute. So the idea is that the absolute can appear in the form of sound, in the form of a word. So that the absolute being absolute, the word can be the thing itself. This is something which has sort of fascinated philosophers for a long time. There is one Socratic dialogue, I forgot which one it is, where Plato, through the persona of Socrates, raises the issue whether the Greek words for things have a special relationship to the thing itself. Like does the Greek word for, let's say, anthropos, man, for which we get anthropology. Let's say the Greek word anthropos, man. Does that Greek word anthropos have any special relationship to the thing itself, to a man? Is it just some random sound that Greek people somehow began to use, or is there some deeper relationship? And the Greeks, of course, were quite ethnocentric. The Greek word barbaros means barbarian, but it also means foreigner. So I think that kind of says it all. Anyways, with the Greeks, so there was this interest, like, is there any special relationship between a word and the thing the word denotes? Now, in the Vedic culture, there's the idea that when God speaks, or when authorized people speak about God, the sound, the words, somehow are not different from the reality because they are Brahman, which is absolute. So that, for example, let's say the Ramayana is being recited in some village thousands of years ago or today. If the Ramayana is being recited, it's not merely a recitation, but actually it's taking place. Somehow there's the notion of, well, there's another key term, Nitya Lila, or eternal pastimes, eternal activities of God. So that the basic story of the Ramayana, or the stories about Krishna and so on, they're not merely historical events that took place one time and never take place again, but they're actually activities that God eternally performs in different worlds, in different universes, and so on. So that the description of it, let's say hearing a recitation of the Ramayana or seeing a theatrical production or taking part in a bhajan or kirtan, singing the story or hearing the story sung and so on, that when this takes place, the events are actually occurring again because they're not material events. They're actually spiritual events which manifest in this world but are ultimately not material. And so you can actually experience them again. This is the idea. And this is really central to a lot of what goes on in Hinduism. And of course it also was picked up by other traditions in India. The idea that by singing, by hearing, by chanting, by participating in or witnessing a theatrical performance, by hearing recitations, by reciting yourself, that you are actually witnessing, you are actually re-experiencing the activities themselves. You are in the presence of God, and you are experiencing the reality of it. It's actually happening in a sense. So, and this is very democratic, it's very egalitarian, because everyone would hear these performances. Everyone would hear Bhagavad Gita. So there's a very strong idea that when the Bhagavad Gita is recited or heard, that the person that recites it, the person that hears it, is actually experiencing the truth of what's in there. So they're not merely hearing a doctrine or a dogma, but they're actually experiencing it. So that when Krishna says the soul is eternal, a faithful person who's reading the Gita or hearing it is actually experiencing the eternality of their soul upon hearing those words. Or when Krishna speaks to Arjuna that you are part of me, the person actually experiences that I'm part of God, and so on. And so this is really at the heart of how these texts are experienced, the claims that are made about them within the tradition. Is there any question on that? I wanted to mention, yes.
I have a question for before. When you were saying that neither gods nor sages know his origins, doesn't that seem like he does have an origin?
Very good point. That was quite astute. Okay, back to the book here. That's a very good point, and apparently Krishna, who seems to be bright, anticipates that question because it's a very good point you made. Because the very next thing Krishna says is that one who knows me as having no origin actually gets it. So in a sense, Krishna is saying that they don't know my origin because I have no origin. I'm beginningless. Yes?
According to this idea that there's no difference between reading it and experiencing it? Is changing the language like that?
No, because in the Karma Kanda section, in the rituals of the early Vedas to get material things, the powers in the sound itself. So if you chant in another language, those are different phonemes. But here, it's the powers in the ideas, and only the powers in the devotion. So that's another sense that because in India, it's been a long time in India that quote-unquote common people didn't really know Sanskrit. And not to speak of the very sophisticated Sanskrit of the Vedas. And so if the truth is limited to that particular articulation of it, most people miss the boat. But in the Bhakti traditions, the devotional traditions, it's available to everyone in any language. If you just hear the story and get it, then you get it. And actually, you get a perfection, you get an achievement which is beyond what the Brahmins are getting. That's a very common theme in these literatures, that which you achieve through devotion goes beyond what can be achieved by mere technical rituals and so on. Yes?
Did God express like the satisfaction of the Brahmin? Why did they lose favorites?
The gods express
The satisfaction of the Brahmins?
At the Brahmins. You're saying because historically they lost favor or something? Yeah, the poor Brahmins. To understand the Brahmins, it's first of all, we have to understand that according to this tradition, we are in the Kali Yuga, which is the lowest of the four great ages. And this age, since Dharma declines severely, and since the Brahmins live by Dharma, when Dharma declines, it means the Brahminical class is declining. One obvious problem was a fixation or a complete rigidifying of hereditary rights to be a Brahmin. I mean, imagine if we had a rule in this country that if your father or mother is a doctor, you're a doctor. And, whether or not you go to medical school, whether or not you know anything about medicine, but if either one of your parents is a doctor, you're a doctor. Now, in an extremely conservative society where children follow their parents very closely, do whatever their parents want, just as in modern America, then you could imagine a situation where if your parents were doctors, you probably really would be a doctor. And that's what used to happen in ancient societies. People were born in extended families. And if you sometimes feel the pressure of what your mother wants you to do or your father wants you to do, imagine if you have like dozens of people like that, and you live in a rural setting, and those are the only people you know, and there are no other job opportunities outside your extended family and village. And so you have this overwhelming economic, social, psychological, vocational pressure. The whole universe that you live in is all telling you you've got to do something. And if you do something else, not only your own extended family will, I don't know, do what to you, but the world won't really accept you. Because the whole world around you, your society, all the elders in the whole society wanting their children to be obedient will reject you if you're not obedient to your family. There will be no job opportunities. You'll basically have to just go to another part of the world. And most people aren't really going to leave everything they know and everything they have and go to another part of the world with nothing, hoping that some evil king won't cut their head off when they get there. So these societies were extremely conservative, and people would actually, for the most part, adopt the vocation of their family. However, they may not. There's all kinds of, they've always been spoiled kids. And so I think a significant percentage of people don't really necessarily dedicate themselves fully. If you get the title for free, I mean, we see that in class. I mean, I've noticed that even in teaching, that if you don't require too much, then people don't. Unfortunately, coercion seems to work in some cases. And so if people aren't being coerced, if you get the title anyway, why go to all the trouble? And so this, if you think about it, the more in a society, the more people identify, let's say, with their bodies, taking out this most basic distinction in South Asian traditions, which in almost all the South Asian traditions, it's one of the key distinctions. That is, the real person is not the body. You know, he won't go into that whole Buddhist analysis of the skandhas and everything. But even in Buddhism, there is a bodhisattva who's something like a soul that comes back life after life in different bodies. And so the bodhisattva is not the body, yet it's some continuous person. So basically, and even the Jains say there's an eternal jiva. Not to speak of Hinduism, Vedanta. So this is one of the basic bedrock distinctions, that the real person is not the body. It's something beyond the body, which is eternal. So now, in a society where people are materialistic in the literal sense of the word, they identify with their bodies, they're going to be very attached to their families. Okay, this is my little kid. Don't tell me little Johnny's not going to be a Brahmin. You know, his dad's a Brahmin, his granddad was a Brahmin, and his dad was a Brahmin. You know, so people get very attached. They get very attached. And, like modern American culture, where the teacher in public schools, the teacher punishes the kid. The parent comes and punches out the teacher or something. So, people get very, very passionate, very attached. And so, the more people in a society, let's say, imagine, just for the sake of imagining, if this view of the universe is accurate, and let's say there are previous ages where people were more enlightened, and large numbers of people were self-realized, because that's the picture that's given me. So, if that were the case, if you just sort of go with this for a minute, just to enter into that world, if that were the case, then you would have people who understood, for the most part, that our real self is not the body. And therefore, we certainly take care of our families, we love our families, but everyone is family. As Krishna says in the Gita, that Krishna at one point, I think it's chapter 9, Pitamasya Jagato Mata, I am the father of this universe, I'm the mother. So among people that really get it, or really believe they understand that everyone is family, everyone is actually family, then you wouldn't have this sort of obsessive attachment that, no, my kid has to get all the privileges I got, even if he's not qualified. People do generally leave their fortunes to their children, even when there's a very good chance that children are going to squander it. So, in fact, if you look at early Christianity, one of the main convictions if you look at early Christian communities, was that the community was a family, and that the biological family was in every way secondary to the spiritual family. And this, of course, can be attributed also to the Jesus of the New Testament. For that, let the dead bury the dead, come with me. Some guy wanted to join the Jesus movement, but he had to bury his father. This was a patriarchal society. Burying your father properly, according to the Bible, was an extremely important duty. It was just a very, very important duty to bury your father. And some guy said, I want to join you, Jesus, but I have to go first and bury my father. And Jesus said, let the dead bury the dead. Come with me. So there's this very strong sense that the real family is the spiritual community, not your biological family. Anyway, however you may see that a statement attributed to Jesus, and whether children really should at least have the decency to bury their fathers and then join a spiritual movement or whatever. In any case, the idea is that the more a society or a community actually takes seriously the idea that we are not merely the body but spiritual beings, and therefore we are all a spiritual family. The community is a family, not merely the biological family. To that extent, obviously there tend to be more opportunities for people that don't have the right last name. In other words, even though you weren't born in this family, if you're qualified, that was very much the spirit of the Jesus movement, that you may not have been born as let's say in the rabbinical order in ancient Israel, but if you follow Jesus, you become a teacher. In fact, you become the most important teacher. And so you find that this powerful egalitarian tendency in devotional revival movements. because what you're reviving is the understanding that we are all equal in the eye of God, or even in something like Buddhism or Jainism, we are all equal as spiritual beings, whatever that means to Buddhists, and we know sort of what it means to Jains. So we are all equal as spiritual beings, and therefore traditional distinctions, hierarchy, social stratifications, and so on and so forth have to be re-articulated in terms of a more important hierarchy, which is who actually is more enlightened and who actually understands the truth. So anyway, so in that sense, the Brahminical order, this is all kind of was triggered by a question someone asked about the Brahmas. The extent to which a society is attached to the body as the self, and therefore biological relationships as central, these are the most important relationships in life, to that extent you'll have an extremely rigid, hereditary social hierarchy. And the extent to which, as we find in devotional movements all over the world, the more that people believe that the real identity of everyone is spiritual and eternal and not merely the body, and that everyone, in a sense, is equal. Actually, in the most important sense, everyone is equal, and therefore it becomes a meritocracy. Whoever understands, let's say, the Buddhist Dharma better becomes the Brahmin, or whoever understands the Jain Dharma, or whoever loves Rama, or loves Krishna, or whatever. In other words, whoever has the highest state of consciousness is the actual teacher, and not someone that has the right last name, or was born in a particular family. So the Kali Yuga, because things are seen to be degrading, the hereditary system became extremely rigid, and we find even in older Vedic literature, I think I might have mentioned this before, but there's a famous story of one of the greatest ancient sages whose name was Satyakama. Literally, truth lover. Kama means desire, sort of means like the one who loved the truth. I think I've told the story before. Satyakama, who was born at the absolute bottom of the Vedic social hierarchy. His mother was something like a prostitute, or extremely promiscuous. It doesn't really make clear in the text whether she was remunerated or whatever. But anyway, she was extremely promiscuous, so much so that this boy wanted to be a Brahmin, which means he had to study with a Brahmin. And just like when you apply, let's say, to the University of Florida or any other educational institution, the first box is last name. Right? That's always the first box, last name. And that was the first box to fill in ancient times in India. So if you went to a guru and wanted to learn the Vedas, the first question was, what's your gotra? In other words, your last name. What's your lineage? As they used to say in Europe, what's your lineage? And so Satyakama asked his mother, what's our lineage? And she said, well, son, I don't really know who your father is. So you can imagine when the mother doesn't know who the father is, that indicates something. So she said, but because my name is Jabala, that was her name, Jabala, therefore your name is Jayavali, which means the son of Jabala. So good luck, kid. So he went to this famous guru and said, I'd like to study the Vedas and I'd like to become a Brahmin. And again, this kid was coming from the very bottom of the social order. What in later Hinduism would definitely be called an outcast or untouchable. Literally outcast in the sense that there are four castes, Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra. So if you're below that, you're an outcast. So he went to this guru and the question came, what's your last name, kid? What's your lineage, your gotra? And he very honestly said exactly what the case was. Well, my mother told me that when she was young, she moved around a lot. And she doesn't really know who my father is. So she said, you can call me Jayavali because her name is Javala. How's that? And so the guru said, kid, you are so honest that you're actually a Brahmin. You're actually a Brahmin because you're so honest. You have the quality of a Brahmin. And so therefore this boy from the lowest imaginable social class became a great sage. And anyway, there are many other stories and texts and so on. There was upward and downward mobility. At a certain point, it became fixed by heredity, by birth. In fact, Krishna, in the Bhagavad Gita, when Krishna talks about this system of castes, he says the castes are assigned on the basis of two criteria. I have to erase this sooner or later. Guna and karma. Guna means the quality of the person. You remember those three gunas: goodness, passion, and ignorance. So if you are a good person, if the predominant quality of your existence is goodness, then you're Brahman. And karma, if you can do the job, the action. So if you got the quality, you can do the job. That he does not say birth. And throughout the Bhagavad Gita, especially actually in the last chapter, Krishna talks many times about this caste system, and over and over and over again he says that you are assigned to a particular caste based on your nature, not your birth, based on your nature, based on what you can do. So clearly the later Hindu system, which became so rigid, is a corruption. And so, like I said, imagine if, the children of lawyers were lawyers, the children of doctors were doctors, brain surgeons. It would get very scary. And that's kind of what happened in India. So, any other questions on that? So, there are other statements about origins. Krishna claims, for example, that the great sages and the manus who rule the world are actually, Krishna says, they come from my nature, and they actually come from my mind. So there's a notion that whatever God thinks or whatever God wills becomes reality in the world, so that you have great sages and cosmic rulers simply coming from the mind of God. Manasajata, the Sanskrit. And then Krishna concludes this little section by saying, Aham sarvasya prabhava, I'm the origin of everything. From me, everything emanates. So this is, if you consider that this Bhagavad Gita was one of the three texts that was used in the Vedanta tradition, the other being the Brahma Sutras and the Upanishads, you can see that that people, when the Vedanta is trying to understand the origin of everything, Brahma Sutras have, the origin of everything, and Krishna is making statements like this: Aham sarvasya prabhava, I am the source of everything. Everything emanates from me. Those who know this, those who understand this, devote themselves to me. So even Shankara, who was the great Advaita philosopher who said that the Ishvara, the Lord, is ultimately a type of illusion, and yet he's considered to be sort of a closet Krishna. He's sort of a closet devotee of Krishna. And he writes this very beautiful prayer in praise of the Gita, in which he really devotes himself fully to Krishna. So there is a strong sense in the tradition that the Brahman of the Upanishads, the absolute truth, the source of everything described in the Brahma Sutras, is actually Krishna. And that conviction is a very major part of Hinduism. It's not the only part, but it's certainly one of the most powerful dimensions of the Hindu tradition.
When Krishna said that everything emanates from him, is this what the Brahman is speaking to Krishna, or like?
Well, Krishna will say in chapter 14 that Brahmano hi pratishtaham, that the Brahman is resting on me, not the other way around. So the idea here is that, okay, here's an example that's given in the tradition. Let's say in the early dawn you see the sunlight, first light of dawn. As in the Star Spangled Banner, right? Oh, say can you see in the dawn's early light. So, first are the dawn's early light. And then, eventually, the sun itself rises. The idea here is that the impersonal Brahman, this impersonal spiritual reality which pervades everything, and that Shankara talks about, the Advaita tradition talks about. According to the Bhagavad Gita, is like this, or the tradition, the Vaishnava tradition, it's like the sunshine, but there's a sun globe that has form. The sunshine has no form, it's just diffused everywhere, but the sun globe itself actually has a real, so to speak, a body. It has a form and a shape. And so the idea here is that that God in a personal form, as Krishna and other incarnations, that actually is the origin of everything. And the impersonal aspect is, so to speak, the energy of God. In fact, this point is brought up explicitly in chapter 12, which I was hoping to get to, but maybe I'll just mention it here, because it's really possible to cover everything in the Gita. Arjuna explicitly raises this question. So I guess you're the new Arjuna. Where Arjuna says that evam satatajuta je bhaktastam pariyupaste, that some people are devoted to you personally. Some people are devoted to you personally as Krishna. And ye chapi aksharam abhyaktam tesham ke yugavittama. And others are devoted to an impersonal aspect of the Absolute, not to the personal God. And then Arjuna says, Tesham ke, of these, which ones are yoga vittama? Which ones actually know yoga the best? Which ones actually understand the spiritual science the best? So it's directly brought up. Is it the personal path, personal devotion to a personal God, or meditation on an impersonal? And Krishna says that Maya Vesha Manoje Mam, those who devote their mind directly to me, personally, and are always engaged in this way, always devoted, they are actually the greatest yogis. They are the ones who best understand the spiritual science. In fact, that came in chapter 6 also, that where Krishna said, of all yogis, the one personally devoted to me is the best. So according to the Bhagavad Gita, and it's throughout the Gita, these are just a few examples, it's very clear that at least the Bhagavad Gita is teaching that ultimately there is a supreme personal God, and that whatever impersonal aspects there may be, or impersonal divine manifestations, those are all resting upon a supreme personal God. That's the teaching of the Gita. It's quite explicit. Although it doesn't necessarily fit stereotypes about Hinduism. Any question about that? No? Hang in there just a few more minutes. Anyway, the chapter 13 talks about stuff, and chapter 14 talks about stuff. In chapter 15, there is an example given that Urdhamulam Dakshaka, that there's a banyan tree. I don't know if you've seen a banyan tree. You can see them in South Florida. They kind of spread their branches out, and the branches grow down and take root. And so Krishna said there's a banyan tree whose roots grow upward, not downward. Anyway, what this turns out to be, he gives this whole metaphor, is that this world, as we know it, is, in Sanskrit, we call pratibimba, a reflection of the real world. That's the idea. That's the way the tradition has understood it. It's just as if you see the reflection of a tree in water, it's merely the reflection of the real tree. And so this world appears to be real, and it has a certain reality, but it's merely a reflection of the real world. So just as we experience ourselves now as persons, as individual, free, conscious persons, that's what we really are. Problem is we're misunderstanding ourselves. We're misunderstanding ourselves. We are seeing ourselves literally superficially, superficie in Latin, the surface. We're taking the surface appearance to be the real self, but actually our real self is the eternal soul within. That's part of God. So in that sense, personal life, relationships, falling in love, all of that is real. It's just that we're doing it, we're trying to do all that in the reflection instead of turning and seeing the reality. In Sanskrit, this is called bimba pratibimba. Bimba, in this is like common philosophical language, means an image, and then pratibimba means the counter image, the reflection. So the actual reality is the spiritual world, the reflection is the material world. And then chapter 16 has stuff, and chapter 17 has stuff. There are all kinds of really interesting things. We don't have time to talk about it, such as, I'll contradict myself and talk about it for a minute, that Krishna says that everyone has faith in something. In other words, Krishna rejects what I consider to be the extremely naive assumption certain modern thinkers that some people live by faith, some people by reason, in the sense that everyone has faith in something. Faith is a constant. Even if you believe the world really exists, even if you believe in the laws of physics, everyone has faith in something. It's simply a question of what you believe in. Finally, in chapter 18, after a lot more stuff, Krishna concludes the Bhagavad Gita by, after teaching all of this dharma that Arjuna has to perform, his Kshatriya dharma, and so on. Krishna concludes the Gita in 1866 by saying that ultimately none of these dharmas will actually save you or give you shelter. He says, come to me alone for shelter. In other words, only God can actually give one shelter. The dharmas we perform will help us to stay in the proper consciousness, will help society to go on properly so that people can live peacefully. But in terms of ultimate enlightenment, that will never come from these dharmas. It will only come by directly giving oneself to God. And that's the conclusion of the Gita. So, now I guess we'll stop here for now. Yes, Kelly? The image and the reflection of the image. Or literally the counter image, or the reflection. Okay? Have a good weekend. Hope you all stay healthy.